are playing their namesake archetypes. Majors winning that Legacy Open on the back end of the Season 1 Invitational with Blue White Red Delver. Smith winning his Legacy Open with Imperial Painter. So if you watch our coverage a lot or just follow Magic in general, you know that both these guys are playing what they've always played in Legacy.
For sure, although I would say that I associate Greg more with Imperial Painter than Majors with Blue White Red Delver. Both players, of course, have had success in 2014 with these decks, so if they're up on each other, it's safe to assume, and Michael Majors' start has definitely given away what he's up to.
Oh, you think so? Delver Secrets off of Volcanic Island. He's either Rug or he's Blue-White Red. He's going to start by attacking for 1 here. Doesn't flip the Delver. And once he plays his Tundra, now Smith knows exactly what he's up to.
And Smith, you saw, had a Mountain in his hand, did not play his Grindstone on the first turn, playing around the possibility of Daze.
Sensei's Divining Top going to be placed on the stack here for Smith. This is a Spell Pierce, so Majors has no interest in letting this resolve. We'll see if a counter war ends up happening here because, of course, Smith does have access to these main deck blasts.
For those of you a little new to the Legacy format, the way that this works is the deck gets Grindstone into play alongside Painter Servant, sets everything to blue. That's a one-shot kill, or at least decking your opponent. This also allows the deck to play a bunch of main deck Red Elemental Blasts and Pyroblasts.
Daze is going to take care of this blast as well, so Majors feels as though it's very, very important that, hey, this Sensei's Top does not resolve, does not flip his Delver again, draws a copy of Wasteland, a card that's not very good against Smith's deck. So he's just going to attack for 1 again. Smith is at 18 as opposed to 14, whereas I'm sure Majors would like him to be. Majors just going to play a copy of Volcanic Island, the one from earlier, and just pass the turn back yet again.
Part of this also might just be Michael suspects that these counters might not have much of a shelf life.
Chandra Pyromaster is going to be placed on the stack now. Does Majors have an answer for this? Because that would take care of the Delver, and the answer is yes, he does. So we'll just hardcast the Daze to take care of that. That'll be Smith's turn as he went down to 16 to do that. Majors will check for Delver. 0 for 3.
But at least as a Stoneforge Mystic, this will allow him to add a little bit more pressure to the table.
In combination with the Wasteland to take care of that Ancient Tomb. Majors is doing okay at this point. At least he has things on the table.
You would feel a little bit more comfortable, of course, if you had additional piece of disruption or at least a Lightning Bolt that can kill Painter Servant, but Majors doing just fine.
We'll see what equipment Michael does want to find. He's going to go with an Umezawa's Jitte, as that one is castable in case Stoneforge Mystic does bite the dust here.
Also, Jitte, if it gets 4 counters on it, can provide some amount of disruption against Painter Servant, which is, so it's another, I don't think it's likely necessarily, but another way that Michael has to fight over Smith's combo.
You see Wasteland take care of the Ancient Tomb, and that'll be Majors' turn. Smith at 15, could be a lot lower, so if you're Greg, you got to feel like you've dodged a couple of bullets here with that Delver not flipping.
Absolutely. I mean, this could have been a really ugly start here for Greg if Michael was able to flip a little bit faster.
Mountain is the play here for Smith. That's how he'll begin his 4th turn of the game. You see an Ensnaring Bridge. There's also a Grindstone along with a Phyrexian Revoker. You have to imagine that Smith wants to get his hand empty now.
For sure, and this hand's very castable, so it's not hard for him to set up this Ensnaring Bridge.
And this is a Revoker. So we'll see if this does resolve, and if it does, we'll figure out exactly what it's naming. I imagine it's Umezawa's Jitte, but we'll get confirmation here. And when we do know, we'll of course let everybody know at home, as here's a Grindstone. And Revoker does name the legendary equipment from Betrayers of Kamigawa. Swords to Plowshares will be turned over. Insectile Aberration has finally showed up to the party, but truthfully, it might be a little too late.
This is a good turn for Michael, though, and again, the Swords to Plowshares is a piece of disruption, as Greg requires a creature in play for his combo to really happen. But it's not clear that Michael is going to be able to get out of this Ensnaring Bridge if Greg is able to resolve it.
An attacker from Majors with Stoneforge Mystic, offering a trade to Phyrexian Revoker along with the Insectile Aberration. See if Smith has any interest in blocking. How heavily does he value this Revoker, especially when he knows his opponent has a Swords to Plowshares in the hand?
Yep. Although it does potentially turn the Jitte online, which is risky as well.
4 damage will come across. Smith is at 11. That is a Tundra. This is an Umezawa's Jitte with the ability to still cast Swords to Plowshares. So Smith will untap those lands. He will take a draw. It's a copy of Painter Servant. That is an Arid Mason. Let's see if he wants to try to deploy Ensnaring Bridge now. Looks like he's going to start by attacking for 2. Majors is going to go down to 18.
This is a pretty good spot. You know, there is a risk, of course, of Spell Pierce happening here, but Michael getting some draw steps is dangerous for you as well. So I like the opportunity here to try to stick this, and that's what Greg's going to do.
So there's a bridge. Majors is going to look at the swords in his hand, as well as something that does not counter this Ensnaring Bridge. So it looks like this is going to be good to go. And now Majors is going to take a look at this card and see if he can figure out exactly how he can go about beating it. 2 copies in Greg's main deck. Ensnaring Bridge, you know, some of these decks play
white for Enlightened Tutor and have an Ensnaring Bridge as a tutor target. Greg not doing that, just playing a couple copies of Ensnaring Bridge in his main deck. There's a lot of decks in Legacy that simply cannot beat this card against an empty hand. Blue, White, Red Delver is one of those decks. Michael is basically drawing just the Lightning Bolts at this point. Certain decks, even like Elves Game 1, can't beat this, even if they go off. So a card that's picked up a lot in popularity because there's so many different decks that are popular that just cannot fight this card.
Source of Plowshares is going to take care of Phyrexian Revoker, which unlocks Musawa's Jite. Smith has one card in his hand, so all that Major's going to attack with is the Jite. So 1 damage is going to come across, 2 counters on the equipment. Smith going to untap and take a draw. Full screen pan. Ensnaring Bridge on screen.
So Greg now has an opportunity. I mean, I believe he has Painter Servant in hand.
Thank you. He also has a red card. Looks like he may have drawn a Blood Moon for the turn, potentially.
Now, what is interesting about Michael getting to connect with that Jite is it does set him up in a position now where he can shrink his Jite to his Stoneforge to 0 power, attack with it. I guess that, no, that still does pump before damage and get 2 counters on his Jite.
Yes.
So he gets to attack for a little bit.
Yes. He has to get a little creative.
It's not pretty. It's not pretty, but it's something.
That's what it takes. And here's a Blood Moon now. Let's see what this is going to be. That's a Brainstorm in response by Majors. So a couple of cards coming here. You see a Brainstormer, Volcanic Island, and a Mystery card. He'll have to put a couple back. But basically what this does is Smith is just trying to lock out the game before going for the Painter.
There's no spells that Michael Majors can cast now except Lightning Bolt, which is notable. This shuts off Spell Pierce and Daze, which may make going off next turn a little bit easier.
And we can't forget about Forceful, of course. That is one that's live. But
yeah.
Majors not finding one of those just yet. So Major's just going to resolve that Brainstorm. Blood Moon is in now, and all Smith can do is simply pass the turn back and hope that this is good enough. Majors will draw a card. It's a Brainstorm. This is going to be an attack for 1 since Smith does have 1 card, and Majors is going to tick that up to 4. You see no pump there. That is key.
Yes. He wants to be able to keep these tokens in play to fight over the card Painter Servant and get maximum flexibility if he needs to shrink his Stoneforge to 0 power.
This is going to be a Jaya. You see Majors is going to take a look at that legendary creature. Jaya Balor, Task Mage, of course, is the one we speak of. A lot of text on that one.
It's an oddball. This is another card that allows Greg to just start blowing things up once he has a Painter Servant sent to blue.
So I think Greg playing this, his thought process, of course, is, well, I want you to kill this with those Jite counters so I can try to get you with my Painter Servant Grindstone combo.
It's also, Greg just needs to keep casting the stuff in his hand. That's one of the problematic things. If Greg could have gotten his hand empty, this game becomes much easier for him.
Yeah.
But instead, he's just drawing these spells where he can't quite chain everything together. And Michael is starting to run away with this Jite.
Looks like Smith is going to try to block here. Force Majors to use some tokens and some counters on that Jite. Majors is thinking about things here, and it looks like Smith may still be considering a block versus not. What happens if I block here versus if I don't? If I don't, I end up taking 4 times 2 is 8. I take 9, and a bolt would kill me. So, you know, it has to be a little bit hesitant, I think.
It's tough, though, because as Michael develops this store of Jite counters, more and more problems start happening to Greg. Of course, his creatures get broken up much more easily, and Michael basically gets to represent a lethal attack at any time, even if Greg is able to get his hand empty because Michael can shrink his Stoneforge Mystic, attack, and then pump for lethal.
In case you weren't aware, Musawa's Jite is a real good Magic card.
It is really powerful.
Yeah. So, that Jite will go up to 5. We're going to remove 2 counters, put that down to 3. And of course, 3 counters is the number that he wants to be on.
That's the magic number for fighting over Painter Servant.
Now for Smith, how does he get himself out of this situation? That's the big question.
Well, he's lost his main deck Phyrexian Revoker, which complicates things quite a bit. He can basically try to get to a spot where he plays Painter Servant, forces Michael to destroy it by, you know, activating Grindstone, and then red blasting the Jite. That's the route. But that's asking a lot. And Greg is facing lethal not this turn, but next.
Greg looking at a couple of red cards there. There's a Simeon Spirit Guide along with 2 copies of Imperial Recruiter. Now, we have seen Greg get himself into some difficult situations before and find ways to pull out of them. So if there's one person, that can find their way out of this situation, it's the player we're watching right now.
Yeah. So maybe Greg hoping that Michael messes up here and just kills the Painter Servant outright, which would leave Michael locked, as he would no longer be able to shrink his Stoneforge Mystic to 0 power.
You have to imagine a player of Majors' caliber is going to see through that. He's going to take a look at Ensnaring Bridge one more time, make sure he knows exactly how this works so he doesn't lock himself out of the game. So he says, let me shrink and let me attack. Smart play.
Yep.
Then again, not surprised to see him make it.
Now, this is important because if Greg blocks,
Okay.
let me think here. He pumps once and shrinks, or pumps twice to get the painter servant off. And then he's still at 2 counters here. If Greg says no blocks, Michael goes to 4 counters. This forces Michael to use 3 counters to kill the painter servant next turn, leaving it with 1 counter, which means he can shrink the Stoneforge next turn, but it'll be 0 power and Jitte won't gain counters.
So the problem here is Majors has to pump. So the problem with that line is that he actually has to pump because the creature's attacking for 0, so he won't go up to 4.
Yeah,
So he actually has to use a counter to go down to 1 and then up to 3.
correct.
So he's still in the same situation where he's using counters to get damage through and still presenting a situation where Painter will die because of the 3 counters.
Now,
He'll never be able to get his Stoneforge up to 4.
Yeah.
He's always going to have 3 counters.
He needed to keep 2 counters on the Jitte the entire time, essentially. 1 to shrink the Stoneforge Mystic, and 1 to pump it so it had power and would trigger the Jitte again.
Yes.
Now that door has closed if Greg activates the Grindstone here, forcing Michael to respond.
So I think in this situation, assuming Greg can get the card that's in his hand out of his hand, he just fires off Grindstone now to force the removal of the counters.
Correct.
I think that could certainly be a line of play that we do see here. It looks like we're going to see an Imperial Recruiter. So Greg tapping 3 mana. Of course, using Arid Mesa right now. The reason for that is because it's a mountain. It is not a fetch land due to Blood Moon being in play. So Imperial Recruiter is going to go a searching. We'll see what he wants to find here. He's got a bevy of options available to him.
Yeah.
You mentioned the Revoker's gone. Are there any spicy one-ofs in there that he can search for?
The Giant Ballard, we've already seen 2 copies of Magus of the Moon, which are redundant, so not really. There's a Goblin Welder.
And that's exactly what he's going to grab.
Curious that Greg did not simply fire off the Grindstone here.
I am a little bit surprised as well.
Maybe he's trying to beat Lightning Bolt or something, but that just seems like he doesn't have the tools to beat that card regardless.
Well, Majors will draw a card for the turn.
Sure.
No cards in Smith's hand, so we could see the same play yet again, and this is it. Make it a 0-1. Come on in. See if Smith has any interest in blocking this one. Again, he still has to be scared of Lightning Bolt, but now the question that Smith has asked himself is, can I beat a Lightning Bolt?
Yeah. And the answer is most likely no.
Well, there's a block with the Imperial Recruiter, so Stoneforge will go up again. Of course, 1 to pump it, and then get the counters back. So he beats Imperial Recruiter in combat. Take a look at the Graveyard Will Majors. His concern, of course, is Goblin Welder. What can that weld in and out and all around? And that's a real concern here. The other thing for Michael right now is that he can't cast any spells because of Blood Moon.
Yeah, he has to beat Greg with basically exactly what you see in play, plus any Lightning Bolts he happens to draw.
Yep. And oddly enough, Welder does actually complicate things quite a bit here. So Smith is going to untap, and he's going to take a draw here. Let's not forget he could well, I guess the Revoker got Sword, so he can't weld that back in, but there are some artifacts hanging out there in the graveyard. So Smith, I think, is considering activating top right now before he draws his card.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that's what the pause is. Is there anything that I'm looking for in particular? Is there anything that I don't want to draw that I can put down?
Well, I think everything is basically castable at this point, so it's not a risk of him drawing something with a bridge that he can't beat.
And this is going to be an activation of Grindstone right now. And he's basically daring Majors to move, but we'll see exactly what is happening here. And Majors says, all right, I would like to remove counters to kill your Painter Servant. Smith says, that's fine. So the Grindstone activation is still on the stack.
Yeah, I think Greg did all this to be able to try to play around a removal spell.
So he's going to go welding, and he says, that's fine. You killed my guy. I'll weld something out and weld back in Painter Servant. Weld out my Grindstone. So now the Grindstone activation is still on the stack. Painter comes in. As it comes into play, it chooses a color. It'll name blue again. And once the Grindstone resolves, it checks for Painter, and that is going to get the job done.
You know, every single time I watch Greg Smith play and I say, I'm not sure what's going on here, the next turn or 2 turns later, I get to figure it out. It's kind of fun.
Yeah, it's him winning the game.
I'm not sure why Greg is doing this right now. Oh, never mind. Yeah, he's got it. Don't mind me over here. Just focus on Greg.
Greg Smith wins game number 1 here over Michael Majors. Imperial Painter up a game over Blue White Red Delver. We're going to head over to the sideboards. I've got Majors in front of me. I'm taking a look at 4 copies of Meddling Mage, 2 Grim Lavamancer, a Flusterstorm, a True Name Nemesis, a Swords of Plowshares, 2 copies of Rest in Peace, a Pithing Needle, 2 Red Elemental Blast, and a Sword of Feast and Famine. We'll talk about the obvious ones first, and then we'll get to the ones that are a little more interesting. Swords of Plowshares, you have to imagine, is coming in.
For sure. Swords of Plowshares is an easy one. I think the 4 copies of Meddling Mage I like a lot in this matchup too.
Okay.
Just fights over random stuff. Greg plays the card Imperial Recruiter, so you'll often have information about what's going on. I like the 2 copies of Grim Lavamancer as well. It's not perfect at fighting over the combo, but it does fight against a lot of the supplemental stuff Greg has going on. It's also something with utility in the event that Greg gets Blood Moon down, which is something Michael could use more of. Blood Moon, of course, causes all sorts of hurdles for Michael. It's also a way to get out of Magus of the Moon, even if Magus resolves while Michael is tapped out.
Now, the interesting one to me is Red Elemental Blast. In this last game that we watched, Greg Smith named blue with Painter Servant. So do we play a little bit of game inside the game, perhaps?
I think that if I was playing against an opponent who I sensed was mediocre, I would consider the Red Blast. But I've seen Greg play on camera too many times against blue decks where he sets a different color in the post-board games, in part because his Red Blasts are just live. He doesn't need to have the Painter Servant set to blue to do anything with his Red Blast. There's going to be targets, and he's just conscious that Red Blasts are a possibility out of the Blue-White Red Delver sideboard. So I've seen Greg play this list too many times where I would not try to do that if I was playing against him.
Smith has some fun ones over there.
1 Manic Vandal, a Red Elemental Blast, a Pyroblast, 2 copies of Tormod's Crypt, 2 more Ensnaring Bridges, 3 copies of Thorn of Amethyst, 2 copies of Whip Flare, a Magus of the Moon, and 2 copies of Phyrexian Revoker. I think the Whip Flares are not, they're pretty solid in this matchup. It doesn't kill True Name Nemesis, obviously, but it kills the remainder of Michael's threats, and the deck's pretty threat-light to begin with. I think the additional copies of Ensnaring Bridge are very easy to come in. Michael really struggles. I mean, you saw that game. He had to jump through all sorts of hoops and have a board already to be able to fight that card. There's going to be a lot of hands that just can't beat it outright. And the additional copies of Red Elemental Blast and Pyroblast. Michael Majors base blue, so the more Red Blast, the better. I think the additional Magus and the Manic Vandal are also live here too. Michael with an equipment package and Magus of the Moon, of course, not as good as Blood Moon because Michael could break it up with lightning bolts and such, but still totally capable of stealing a game.
If you are just joining us, you've joined us in the first round of our 4 legacy rounds here of our Season 2 Invitational. Cedric Phillips, Patrick Sullivan, and Matthias Hunt bringing you coverage all weekend long here from our Season 2 Invitational in Columbus, Ohio. We're at the Origins Game Fair, having a blast at SCG Live, hashtag SCGINVI for your tweets all weekend long as we watch Star City Games Legacy Open champion from Season 1, Greg Smith, with Imperial Painter up a game against Michael Majors, who won the first Legacy Open of Season 2 with Blue White Red Delver.
And Greg Smith getting off to a 4-0 start in Standard is a huge deal because I think he's likely to go 6-2 or better in Legacy.
Yes.
I've seen him play this deck too many times. He's incredibly skilled with it. And so a very good finish in Legacy is in the cards for him. And if he's able to cobble together, you imagine a 6-2 record in Standard for Greg, let's say, he's got a real shot at making the elimination rounds. I think if you ask Greg before the tournament, let's imagine we give you a 6-2 record in Standard and you just play the Legacy rounds, I think he would take that. Going into the tournament, I believe he would take that.
I have to imagine that's the case, yeah.
A 4-0 start is a big deal.
Especially when there are more players in attendance here this weekend as well. 435, our largest invitational ever here in Columbus, and overall, of course. So, this particular weekend, 4 losses a lot of times is going to get the job done at the invitational. Not maybe this weekend.
I think we're looking at X3.
Yeah,
as the record required.
X3-1, depending on circumstance.
Yeah.
But he's off to a beautiful start, as is Majors. Majors, of course, in a tough matchup right now, though.
He does have some tools. The bolts and the plows do things against Greg's deck. He's got a quick clock. He's got counter spells. But the fact that Blood Moon and Magus of the Moon and Ensnaring Bridge present all kinds of hurdles, even if he's able to fight over the combo, Michael's resources are just taxed in a lot of different directions. He has to prevent Greg from just killing Michael outright. And he also has to fight over these one-card locks, basically, in Blood Moon and Ensnaring Bridge that aren't going to be game over 100% of the time, but certainly a large percentage of the time, they're going to prevent Michael from being able to take any game actions.
Smith and Majors going to be getting game number 2 here in just a little bit. Legacy is going to be a lot of fun to watch here. You see Eric Smith, Gerard Fabiano, Kent Ketter. They're playing some feature matches right now. Jerry Thompson, I don't know if you saw what he's playing in Legacy.
I have not.
He has 4 gambles in his deck.
Ooh.
And a lot of lands.
Okay. I also really enjoy covering Greg a lot because he's the least expressive player that we have on camera.
You're getting nothing.
Nothing.
There's no smile. Like that game, I feel like that game's like, it's a really impressive win to work your way out of that situation.
Not easy.
You're playing against a very skilled player in Michael Majors, and you can definitely tell that Majors knows what's going on, shrinking his Stoneforge Mystic, attacking. Didn't have to think about that play a lot. He already saw it immediately. And he's just, search my welder. All right, after my grindstone. All right, you killed it. Weld it back in.
Oh, you have a bolt. That's fine. It doesn't even matter.
Yep, I won game 1 as I should. Just nothing, no emotion, no happiness, just getting the job done. He's at work here.
I also like his list a lot because there's a lot of just kind of random fun ofs.
I love a good fun of.
One Chandra in the main deck, totally sweet.
Yep.
Totally sweet.
Seeing more play in Legacy than it is in Standard, one could argue. Looks like Majors are going to take a mulligan here. Smith looks pretty happy. Again, Smith is in a pretty good matchup here, so you have to imagine that most of his hands are going to be keepable.
For sure. And Michael, again, there's some Delver lists that get, Rogue Delver, for example, gets access to Ancient Grudge. That's really helpful in this kind of matchup, and especially in fighting the card in Staring Bridge, but Michael does not have access to a card quite that efficient. And in fact, it doesn't appear that he has any copies of Wear Tear in his sideboard, which is a pretty common blue-white-red Delver sideboard card.
Yeah, you'll see one of those normally.
Craig Crumple's winning deck, I believe, was playing one in New Jersey, and in fact came up in the elimination rounds where it blew up a Blood Moon and an artifact.
That's a delight.
Really powerful in this matchup.
Yeah. And no Wear Tears here for Major this weekend. And we'll see if he's going to be okay without it. Smith going to shuffle that up. Major's going to take a look at 6 cards here. One of the problems that Chris Van Meter was having earlier during Season 2 is you just couldn't find a Legacy deck to play. And every time he tried to blue deck, the story was oftentimes the same. He's just like, keep playing against Blood Moon and these stupid painter decks. And it's like, well, that's why those decks are good.
There's one tournament where he walked out of the feature match area or outside of the hall where he looked like he was in Groundhog Day. He's just like, I keep playing these decks. I just get Blood Moon multiple times every single tournament. I cannot do this anymore.
Major's going to start off with a Ponder off of Volcanic Island.
Now, naturally, Van Meter is the one Blood Mooning people now.
Oh, yes, he knows.
Yeah.
He knows his pathway to victory. Also putting Emrakul and Gristlebrand to play, hopefully, on turn number 1. So enough fair magic for Chris, as Majors is going to shuffle up off of this Ponder.
I like saying this, Michael Majors shuffles off of a fair, much higher percentage of his Ponders than I think the average player does. I do as well, so it's some sort of affirmation for my own way of playing Ponder when I see Michael on camera.
Maybe his Ponders are just bad a lot. Had you considered that?
Mine feel bad all the time. That's part of the factor, I also just like the mystery box.
Mystery box.
I
like to shuffle.
Who knows?
Well, he picked up a Delver of Secrets. Not a bad mystery.
Yeah, sure. See? That's exciting.
Imperial Recruiter was the draw there for Smith. He just placed a mountain before passing the turn back over to Majors. Majors will draw his card. Looks like he may have picked up a Wasteland. Let's see where he wants to start. It is going to be the Delver he found off the Ponder. There's a second land in Wasteland before passing the turn back over to Smith, who will take a draw. It's a copy of Simeon's Spirit Guide.
And Majors may have kept his hand on the strength of the Ponder and its ability to find a Tundra, but it appears that Majors is without white mana.
Let's see if this is going to be a Blood Moon effect here for Smith. You see him fishing through his hand, and that is a Blood Moon effect. And this is actually really, really big here, as that is a daze, because that was his draw, which is a Simeon Spirit Guide. Now Major has to look at his hand and say, all right, how do I get out of this one?
The answer is he cannot. I mean, he can cast his equipment for the rest of the game. He can hope this Delver's good enough. He can cast bolts and Grim Lavamancers and such, but...
Well, it's time to check with Delver, and Delver is going to flip. It's a Gataxian Probe.
You can cast that one, too.
You can cast that one. You'll have to pay a little bit extra, but you can cast that one. That's what he's going to do. So let's see what Greg Smith has. Does he have an answer for the Delver? The answer is yes, he does. A Pyroblast in his hand, along with 2 copies of Imperial Recruiter, a Painter's Servant, and a Mountain.
That's a brutal hand for Majors to see here, because his real path to winning this game was just hoping that Greg had no answer for this Insectile Aberration. But the writing's on the wall with a Pyroblast, the ability to pay for a daze, even if Michaels could cast it, which he can't. Michael clearly didn't have Force of Will last turn, because he would have Force of Will the Blood Moon, so...
Greg going to cast that Pyroblast to take care of the Delver. Picked up a copy of Red Elemental Blast for his draw. You can see just how good this matchup is for him. Spell Pierce the draw here for Majors. All you can do is pass the turn back. Again, Mike will not be able to cast any spells now. You have to wonder how he's going to be able to get back in this game. I have heard stories of players getting out of this situation. One of them, Owen Turtenwald, at Grand Prix Washington, D.C., got Blood Mooned early, drew a bunch of lands, hard cast the Batterskull, and his opponent did nothing the
Yep.
entire game. That is how he won, as Painter's Servant is naming white.
I have a feeling that this game will not be the same story.
Perhaps a 17-point beatdown. There's Nared Mesa.
Yeah, this is the excruciating part of the game where Majors has to sit in agony and wait for the sweet release of death.
A Magus of the Moon going to come to play. Majors draws the very powerful Brainstorm, but cannot cast it. As Smith draws a copy of City of Traders. He's coming in for 3. I wonder how many games Greg has won manual style. Probably a lot.
I think I've seen one.
It's not always Grindstone plus Painter. I'm sure he doesn't mind getting in the red zone for 3 points a turn. City of Traders will be a mountain at this point. There is an Imperial Recruiter. Time to search up another Knucklehead.
And this is one of those, I think it's even more frustrating when you have a bunch of foils and expensive lands in your deck because it feels like your assets are being frozen. Like the bank has frozen your assets, staring at this hand of just uncastable stuff.
Smith's going to figure out exactly what he wants to search for. It looks like it may be a Goblin Welder, and it will be. Looks like he just wants to add some more creatures to the table. Let's get this game over with.
Just getting killed by this motley crew.
Yeah, you can see that was the frustration pass by Majors.
This Dick Tracy rogue gallery of Mon's Goblin Raiders, 1/3s for 2. It's a tough way to go out.
It's not the prettiest way, but it gets the job done. There's a Lightning Bolt. That'll be targeting, let's see, Magus of the Moon. Sure, get that off the table. Only take 3 will Majors. He's going to go down to 10. And this is a Mountain. That's another Imperial Recruiter. Time to search something else up now. And he's going to go with another copy of Recruiter. The Chain.
Yeah. Chaining together 1/1s. Because that is the fastest way he can kill from here.
Majors will draw a card. It's a copy of Gataxian Probe. He will fire that off. Take a look at a Red Elemental Blast and Staring Bridge and another copy of Imperial Recruiter. He can record that information, but I don't think it'll change his decisions. He just really can't do all that much right now.
Just a perfect draw here for Greg and another demonstration of the power of Blood Moon.
Well, a Batter Skull is the draw. He's too far away from that, and he has to extend the hand. So Greg Smith with Imperial Painter, cool, calm, and collected, moves on to 5-0.
Doesn't even crack a smile after locking Majors very early